The compassion and greatness of a society can be judged by how that society treats its youngest members, its oldest members, and those who fought to keep that society free, its war veterans. Ensuring that war veterans are treated with the dignity and care that they have earned and deserved has been the mission of our next speaker for many, many years. Lieutenant General, the Honorable Ромео Деллер, is a celebrated advocate for global human rights, a highly respected author, public speaker, leadership consultant, international advisor, a former Canadian senator, and founder of La Fondation Ромео Деллер and the Delher Institute for Children, Peace, and Security. In his distinguished military career, General Delher served most notably as Force Commander of the United Nations Assistance Mission for Rwanda during the 1994 genocide. Armed only with blue berets, General Delher and his team saved 32,000 people from the massacre, negotiated with rebel leaders to halt the killing, and repeatedly urged UN member states and the international media to intervene. With only a few thousand troops and ammunition to reinforce his efforts, it is believed that he could have prevented much of the bloodshed. Instead, 2 million people were displaced and nearly 1 million lives were lost. General Delher has been decorated with the Order of Canada, the Meritorious Service Cross, the United States Legion of Merit, the Aegis Award on Genocide Prevention. Whether as a military commander, humanitarian, speaker, or author, General Delher works tirelessly to bring national and international attention to urgent global issues. The UCC and the Canada-Ukraine Foundation are grateful for the opportunity to work with General Delher in his capacity as head of the Ukrainian Veterans and Families Assistance Task Force. We thank him for his passion and tireless dedication to Ukraine's freedom and the Ukrainian heroes who defend that freedom. It is my honor to welcome General Delher to the Triennial Congress of Ukrainian Canadians.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I hope that helps you with your digestion. I've been given 20 minutes or so, and if you think a retired general and a retired senator can understand what brevity means, you're in the wrong room. But I shall try to do my best to speak to you as a soldier, as a veteran, as a commander of troops, as a commander who has lost troops in battle, who's seen troops injured for life, as a commander who is a son of a veteran of World War II, 6 years overseas, and I was born in 1946 and came over on a Red Cross ship with my Dutch mother and lived a life in a family of veterans, which for too many nights I prayed God that he would come and take my father away. Because living with someone who has lived the horrors of combat and war and the destruction, massive destruction of human life and abuse of every possible right to human beings, you cannot resolve it alone. And as such, we abandoned our troops when they came home. In World War I, when 600,000 came back from Europe, within a year we had riots in the streets here in Canada where we shot some of our veterans in those riots because there was absolutely nothing for them, for their injuries, for the price, and for their families. We are in a scenario, ladies and gentlemen, now in Ukraine, or should the already 1.3 million veterans who have fought and lost so many of their colleagues and living with those traumas, and their families who are trying to adjust not only to, as the general population to the concept of being a country at war, but also having a combatant come back who's not the same man or woman that left. Because they know either they're not the same as the people he left, for they have affected and have suffered and been traumatized. And now they even have problems how to talk to each other. What do you say so you don't create a friction, an explosion in the family? How do you adjust? How do the spouses realign what they've been doing so bravely behind the lines, now see the veteran come back and people trying to realign what a family structure should be? How is the veteran going to be a useful and, in fact, a force multiplier in rebuilding the nation if there is no way of reintroducing them into society? Because they're not living in society now on the battlefield, they're living in hell. And they're under the influence of the demons of war. And in so doing, every reference to every value they had, every reference they had to a spiritual strength, to a moral strength, has been challenged and has been burned, tested with ethical and moral and legal dilemmas of what to do from one moment to another, to save someone, to shoot someone. How does a soldier come back after defending his position and working and having to face soldiers that are children? Today with me is my wife, who for 25 years ran the Military Family Support Centers and one of our big bases in Quebec. For 25 years. She's the one who was picking up the pieces that I was sending back. She's the one who saw the body bags come back. She's the one who was trying to handle the families. She's the one with the children, and how do they readjust? She's the one that's trying to explain to government that children living in a family like that, teenagers particularly, who find no help outside, no structure to help them, are committing suicide. Children are committing suicide because they can't live in a family like that. And so, ladies and gentlemen, those troops are in the front lines, the families are right behind the front lines, and your nation depends on their willingness to fight, their willingness to win, and to sustain it, and on the ability of the families to rebuild with them afterwards when they're home with whatever scale of injuries, physical or psychologically. They can rebuild with them a family and help rebuild the nation to meet its full potential that Ukraine has. You cannot abandon them to ad hoc processes that will, in fact, potentially subvert the democratic structure that you are in. You don't want your soldiers rioting, your veterans rioting in Kyiv. You don't want them rioting to try to get a decent living and support. You don't want the Russians to use that as a tool to undermine, by making them rogue and undermine your democracy. That's the risk that's evolving now with this loose and yet wanting institution of how do you handle people who have fought and are injured, and how do the families relive a normalcy of life. I lived in a family where I wanted my father dead until I came back from Africa. And like Ukraine, my force was abandoned in the field with no ammunition, no food, no water, no communications, and nobody gave a damn of people slaughtering other human beings in the hundreds of thousands for months. Nobody came, not even Canada. And so, to what extent do we, in fact, engage? There are no Canadian troops fighting as Canadians under Canadian policy in Ukraine. The day the Russians cross that eastern border, I am of the school that says that NATO should have crossed the western border and stood there on their own. And when Putin threatened us with tactical nuclear weapons, we should have called his bluff. And so, ladies and gentlemen, no matter how much ammunition I was being given finally in Rwanda, no matter how much food was trying to get in, or vehicles, or fuel, if I didn't have the troops trained and able and willing to fight because it was right, because they were defending things that were right, because they were going to be taken care of if they're injured or killed, but more importantly, their families felt that the mission was right, the families were being taken care of, and the families were going to be able to be full-fledged members of society with that experience to give them a foot up on helping the nation rebuild. If you don't provide that, you don't win. You get a stalemate, you get a truce, and you wait another 5 years until the damn thing starts over again. And so, ladies and gentlemen, you as the diaspora here of a nation at war, again, one of the components of sustaining that nation and ultimately rebuilding it is not only getting all the kinetic tools to fight, but it is the will and the desire of those that are fighting to give all they can with the faith and the belief that the nation is going to take care of them and use them to rebuild the nation, and that their families are being protected, their families are being given opportunities for employment, the spouses will be able to give an opportunity for reemployment, and as such, the kids will be able to study, graduate, and lead potentially normal lives and move the nation to find a solution that is much more lasting than the truce that might end up in the months to come. And so, ladies and gentlemen, do not underestimate the soft underbelly of this fight. And that soft underbelly is abandoning or treating in an ad hoc way or letting others come in from left, right, and center, tripping over each other sometimes to try to do the job for you. Let us help build a national institutional capability so that the 1.3 million veterans now, and how many more in the months to come, and the nearly 5 million family members that are directly affected, that they become not a liability, but become a force multiplier for your nation. And they have paid the deepest of prices, and they will respond to the challenges of building a great nation that will be, in fact, exemplary for many of us, and build on that experience of war to smarten up the West and other countries, that it's not by war that you advance humanity, but it's by finding other means, and you have paid that price to teach the rest of Europe and the rest of the developed world that there is a way, surely, to find lasting peace and serenity without having to slaughter each other the way we're doing now. My wife and I After helping build the Canadian system that had not been at war for nearly 40 years, when we helped build the system here, she got the Canadian government to change its policy that families are now part of the operational capability of the forces that are fighting. We've got soldiers who are in Afghanistan who were Skyping the family an hour later on patrol and half an hour later dead on that patrol. That moves the family pretty damn close to the front lines. We are all in it together. And so they got to be treated like that. So the policy is that families are part of that operational priority. Not just rifles, not just ammunition, but the people to make them want to fight and to survive and ultimately to be able to rebuild. And so that's a critical component of the advancement of the future of your great nation, is how that lesson is going to be used to reinforce the depth of the conviction of a great historic nation, people, to take a very leading role in Europe in educating the others that not just by rearming are we going to win, but by moving soft power and by treating people and learning the lessons of war, that we will be able to ultimately find lasting peace. I was injured psychologically, and when I came back and found a different family and they found a different man, suicide was a perfect option. And for years and years and years, as we tried to build our system, we started to try to see that maybe there's value in wanting to live again. And it's with love in the family, love of those who are close to us, love and commitment to other human beings, that I was able to dispense with the option of wanting to limit my life and wanting to grow with it and wanting to do something with it. And Marie has permitted that. And so do that. So the theme that I was invited here on was Canada and Ukraine and the support we give. We ain't even coming close. For my criteria was we should have had boots on the ground. Between that and what we're doing now, we've got to consolidate that effort, and we've got to focus that effort, and not just fight the enemy and win, or draw them to a stalemate that makes it impossible that it continues, and ultimately maybe find a longer lasting solution. But we must also concurrently look at how we're going to use that experience of war to build the nation stronger. And this country has got to move more than ammunition and guns. It's got to move expertise and support and embed and reinforce what the nation is trying to do to permit it to handle the complexities and the ambiguities of this era, and particularly in a nation that is demonstrating such incredible resiliency, innovation, risk-taking, but just guts, that it knows it's right, and it wants to win, but it wants to grow and grow and grow, so that their youth are not found on battlefields. When Marie and I went into Borova and got shot at and pulled out because the Russians were coming in the next morning, when we went into the battlefields and saw the mass graves in Asylum, in Oskil, in Slovialis, when we went in there, we touched, smelt, felt, heard the war. When I discussed with the brigade commanders, one of them wanted to recruit me, but I was ready to take the job, but Marie didn't want to take it. When you've done that and lived that, you know that there is a reason to go beyond purely the kinetic dimensions of war. Because the children that we found on the battlefield the next day, we saw them. Some of them were under 18, which is against the International Protocol on Child Rights and the Optional Protocol. Under 18. And so, I end with this. My father, for years and years, despised the 11th of November. He was a career soldier. He joined in 1929. He'd been a career soldier. He despised the 11th of November, not because people were commemorating, which was absolutely essential. People were thinking about that. That's okay. But he despised it, as so many veterans do, because on the 11th of November, we relive war. It took nearly 20 years for me to go and watch our national 11th of November. Why? Because it comes back. Well, let me use the example. I remember still this pimply 19-year-old journalist to this octogenarian interviewing him on 11 November and said, "How was it really on the beaches that day?" And this gentleman started to talk, and within 30 seconds, he was breaking down. And the young guy said, "Oh, the memories must be coming back." No. That veteran, at that moment, was back on the beach, digitally clear. He had just shit his pants. The brains of his buddy who had been shot up were laying all over him. He was wet. The bullets were flying, and he was being ordered to keep moving forward. He was reliving. We relive the war. It doesn't end when the politician says it ends. It really ultimately never does end. All you do is build a prosthesis to live with it. And so, in that context, what you create in the nation after fighting a war, as my Dutch cousins in Holland lived, but what you create is a resiliency in a nation when it faces the experience of it and is prepared to take care of those who have been casualties and injured. And now I end up with a service dog too. So
I have to go to speak on the other side.
do not underestimate, ladies and gentlemen, the extraordinary potential that the veterans and their families will provide your nation to rebuild and sustain sacrifices that are required to rebuild the nation and put her back into a position that will be a pride of the union in which it will join and will be an example for other nations to learn from, that hard power in war is not peace, it's a truce. Only through the commitment of its people to its values and to its ability to sustain and build and make its youth become, particularly that Z generation, to become the assets of the future and give them that opportunity. That's a nation that we should be aiming for, and I believe you will be able to achieve. But you won't if you don't make a far, far more imposed and deliberate effort in taking that massive volume of human power in the veterans and their families and make it work as a value added to your nation. I applaud you for committing. I remember spending a lot of time with the Rwandan diaspora after, and the years of trying to come out of that genocide. Don't even think of reducing your work. But don't let people get away with words and just throwing ammunition at the problem. Have them commit to the depth of the nation, its experience, and how it can rebuild concurrently as it's fighting to be an example for the rest. And I believe that. My last comment, now that I've ruined your digestion, a classmate of mine at Royal Military College, whose name is Ron Kazmar, from a little town called Ituna, Saskatchewan. And he invited me to his wedding in 1969 when I was at the artillery school in Shiloh, Manitoba, near Brandon. Nobody applauds for Manitoba? And so we had this extraordinary community gather to help in this fantastic wedding. And we ate 5 times and we drank more illegal booze than you can count, including the RCMP officer who was there. And we drove to Yorkton on a gravel road with a case of beer in the trunk. Well, it didn't stay in the trunk, really. But what was extraordinary is that I met his uncles, and I saw in their hands, the pores of their hands, black. It was earth. The earth was inside the pores of their hands. My father, as a mechanic, grease was in the pores of his hands. And I said, I come from Montreal, and all we hear is you guys complaining about the weather. I said, I'll come and work a month for room and board. Ladies and gentlemen, the experience of living in that community for a month and working from morning to night, so hard that I can barely remember what it was to not work, was a magnificent experience of the resiliency of the Ukrainian society transplanted into a new world and building it in sweat, in tears, log cabins until Diefenbaker came around and brought the wheat board, and ultimately also in blood. And so I thank you, who comes from an old French-Canadian family. I thank you for committing yourself to this great nation. And I only ask that you look back home and don't let those here let up in the priority of helping and making Ukraine win at the most honorable possible solution, and to help those who have helped that nation stabilize security-wise in order to become the value added of the future, and their children the most experienced of how to make the sacrifices needed to build a great nation. Thank you very much. I was asked to stay. If you think I want to walk away from a microphone, I'll finish with a joke. As I learned the English language in East End, Montreal, they taught me a little rhyme at Cubs. And it goes like this. When you're out with your honey and your nose is a runny, don't think it's funny, because it's not.
Okay, I don't know how I'm going to top that, but General Delлер, on behalf of the Ukrainian community and the Triennial Congress, which brings us together from coast to coast to coast, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for speaking with us today. You reminded us of just how far we have to go to give true meaning to the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide. Your remarks were moving and inspirational, and we won't give up. We are blessed to have you as a passionate advocate for Ukraine and Ukrainian veterans who deserve and have our unequivocal support. Please accept from us this gift as a token of our appreciation. From Helmets of Heart, a symbol of gratitude and respect for your work. Helmets of Heart is an art initiative that transforms battle-worn helmets into works of art. This piece by Anastasia Poderivianska of Kyiv is called Svitanok, or Dawn. Born out of the Rebuild Ukraine hackathon, the project has been displayed in the Canadian Senate and across Canada. It is run by several Ukrainian activists from Ukraine and Toronto, led by Zenon Radavich, who I invite to present the gift to General Delert.
Thank you to the Ukrainian Canada Foundation for helping Mary and I do our research on the ground, and her report is being presented right now, in fact, on the needs. And so I strongly recommend that you get the Canadian government to do something tangible about it. Thank you.